Hi there. It's September 16th, and today we're continuing our journey through Paul's letter to the Galatians. We're in chapter 2, and we're reading from verses 17 through to chapter 3 and verse 9. So Paul has been telling his story of how he's been freed from the need to observe legal traditions, and he's also told us how he faced Peter up with his hypocrisy when he came to Antioch. And now Paul gets into, as it were, the meat of his argument here in Galatians, as he's explaining to the Galatians why they can't rely on the law to get right standing with God anymore, why they can't rely on the traditions, the Mosaic traditions. He's basically saying if we do that, we're suggesting that Jesus has come to promote a system that actually makes us sinners. Because after all, we can't obey the law. We can't do what the law says. So he's saying that surely means that if we're trying to keep the laws plus Jesus, if it's Jesus plus tradition, then Jesus is leading us into a system that is going to make us sinners again. Paul says that can't be the case. He says because it's as though in Jesus, when Jesus died, I died to the law. I'm now as removed from that system as the dead are from the living. And he says, I know it's not me that's living anymore. I'm no longer trying to be Paul living. It is now the power of Christ that is living in me, this risen power, this resurrection life that is living in me. And the life I now live, I live by the power of the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. For Paul, it's no longer about doing things to try and get God's favour. It's actually all about Messiah. It's all about Jesus. It's all about his death and resurrection and trust and commitment to him. And this is the crux of what he's trying to get at. And so at the beginning of chapter 3, Paul uses quite an uncomplimentary expression when he's speaking to the Galatians, and he says, oh, you witless Galatians, you foolish Galatians. It's not that the Galatians are stupid, it's actually that they have understanding, but they've denied it, they've left it behind, they've forgotten what they were taught. He says, who has, and the word he uses is a Greek word, vaskeno, who has, where our word fascinated comes from. But we might translate it as, oh, Galatians, who has hypnotized you? It's as though they've been bewitched, they've been hypnotized by these Judaizers into believing that they need to practice the law as well. And then Paul says, look, how did you get this good news in Jesus? Was it by coming under legal traditions? Was it by coming under observances? Was it by needing to get circumcised? Or did God give you his Spirit without circumcision? This is one of the key things that we need to understand. When the Holy Spirit is poured out on the house of Cornelius in Acts chapter 10, the Holy Spirit comes upon uncircumcised Gentile believers. And this is a sign for Paul and ongoing for the church that circumcision is not necessary for the Spirit of God to come and live in us. And therefore Paul says, you started in the Spirit. Why are you now trying to revert to legal traditions? Why are you trying to do things to keep God happy when God has already poured out his Spirit on you? And God is not wanting their obedience. He's wanting their obedience, but he's not wanting their subservience to laws. He has already given Jesus, and what God is looking for is trust, is faith. And then Paul pulls on a picture that he has used a lot, and he's already used it in Romans, and he's using it here. In fact, he was using it maybe for the first time here in Galatians, as this is one of his first letters, and he pulls on the picture of Abraham, the great patriarch, the one to whom all Jews would look as the fount, as the source of their story. And he says Abraham did not receive God's promise, did not receive justification by the things he did. After all, Abraham was living hundreds of years before the law, before the Mosaic code came into being. But because Abraham trusted God, it was credited to him as right standing. It was Abraham's faith, not his deeds. And this is something we need to be holding on to, that Paul is holding on to. Abraham trusted God, and therefore the invitation for us is to trust, not to try and do things that make God happy. It's so easy, isn't it, to try and do things to look holier. It's a belt and braces thing. We have the belt of the goodness of God. We have the the belt of the grace of God, the belt of truth in that sense, but we want to put on the braces of tradition. We want to put on the braces of religious observance, just in case. But Paul is saying here the braces of religious observance are not needed. Only that belt of truth, which is faith in Jesus. Let's be trusting Jesus today. Let's be grateful for the amazing thing he's done for us. Let's realize that traditions and observances are not needed in order to bring us that right standing with God. Have a very good September 16th.